Welcome to tonight's episode of Beyond Focus TV. I'm your host, Lydia Patel, and as always, we have a very special guest for you. Manbo Dowoti Desir, who's a high priest of Voodoo, is in the house with us for the next 30 minutes. Definitely going to be an interesting episode, so stay with us. You're watching Beyond Focus TV. Beyond Focus TV allows you to discuss contemporary topics affecting the Caribbean people on both a national and local level. The show features informed guests who offer insight, debate, and evaluate various issues. Beyond Focus TV builds on the station's mission to provide useful information to the Caribbean people in New York and abroad. Beyond Focus TV, where our viewing audience can get educated, informed, and empowered. Welcome back. You're watching Beyond Focus TV. I'm Lydia Patel, sitting here with Manbo Dowoti Desir, a high priest of Voodoo, tonight with us here on Beyond Focus TV. It's great to have you here, please.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you're going to inform us, give us some interesting information. Of course, a lot of our viewers are of Haitian descent, represent the Haitian diaspora. So this is going to be an interesting topic. For a lot of people, this kind of is going to be something that they may have heard in their homes, get some information. So let's get straight to it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started and into spiritual work to begin with.
Well, I was actually born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I have lived here for many years. I consider myself probably one of the oldest members of the Haitian diaspora in terms of the length of living here in the United States. I didn't grow up in your typical Haitian household in terms of witnessing anyone practice voodoo. And in fact, my family stopped practicing voodoo because I believe all of our families practice the religion. And as Haitians, because voodoo is not just religion, it's a way of life, it's a discipline, it's a way that we relate to the world, so that we're always practicing voodoo. But in terms of the actual spiritual work, my family stopped in 1932.
Okay. Quite some time.
Yeah, quite some time ago because of the anti-superstition, quote-unquote, campaigns that were taking place at the time. And no one has practiced the religion, but it isn't one of these things that you have a choice about. You know, it's in all African-based traditions, and this is true for Lukumi, for Santeria, for all of them, someone in the family must uphold the tradition. So the Loi, the spirits, choose someone. Another way of thinking about it is that we say that we make a contract with God before we enter into this space to become priests, to become a television host, to become, something else, a baker, a doctor, and then it's our responsibility to fulfill those tasks.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. So, of course, many, many years, this has become a lifestyle for you. This is what you know. This is what you've been doing. Let's talk about some of the misconceptions because, of course, you're an author.
Yes.
This is your book, and we'll get to the book later on in the program, but definitely a lot of interesting material in this as well. But tell us about, like I was saying, misconceptions, a lot of negativity, but it could be used for negative if you choose to use it for negative.
Right.
Whereas, just like anything else, there's good and there's evil.
Right. I think of divine spirit as energy that is both positive and negative. It's like fire, it's like water, earth, air. Those things can be used to our advantage, just like you use fire to cook. But on the other hand, if you abuse fire, you can destroy something. So that's the way we have to think about the power that each of us holds within us. And because voodoo is oftentimes thought of as like devil worshipping or doing something terrible and associated with zombies and all sorts of ridiculous things, I found it necessary to counter that. So in some ways, my book is a form of practicing voodoo. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because let's work with this idea of zombie for a minute. All right. What does it mean to be a zombie? It means that you don't have will. You don't have the ability to make any choices. It means that you don't have memory. You don't have history. And for me, the transatlantic slave trade was something that attempted to wipe away the memory and the history of African descendants. Voodoo teaches us to remember things, to know who we are, to understand where we came from, and to honor and respect, honneur and respect our ancestors. So this book, Goud, Kase, Goud, Conjuring Memory in Spaces of the Afro-Atlantic, is a form of voodoo. People don't think of it that way, but that's my 21st century interpretation of one of the ways in which the tradition can be upheld.
Now, why do you think that there are so many, like the Western view of, like you said, zombies and sticking pins and little voodoo dolls? And do you think there must be some element of truth somewhere that is kind of like broken telephone in the game, where it was one part of the conversation, by the time it made it, it's no longer that initial conversation anymore? And how are you highlighting that in your book?
Well, there's always some element of truth to any falsehood, especially one that can sustain the test of time. But we have to remember the circumstances under which these lies were told. And these lies were told, and they started to become very public and took on a global tone during the American occupation. And so some of the first books, some of the first movies that came out about, devils and voodoo dolls and pins and all this nonsense came with the Americans. And in fact, they bought some of their own superstitions and imposed them on us, things that they didn't understand about their own culture, their own history. Mm-hmm. And then they took the things that exist. I mean, there are quote-unquote voodoo dolls in voodoo, but they're not used to stick pins in people. They're like talisman where you say prayers. And you encase the prayer. It's like it's in your heart. Okay. And you leave it out for the energy to carry it into the universe. It's none of this, maliciousness. In fact, the sticking the pins in dolls, that is a Celtic, an Irish Celtic practice. So
very interesting.
Yeah. But my book doesn't talk so much about voodoo itself as much as it talks about the issue of memory and the right to memory, and to get us to understand how the monuments of the Ma'afa, known as the transatlantic slave trade and captive Africans, was again a means of taking away who we are, taking away our spirit, but that there are monuments and memorials and historic places that really that become sacred spots for us, sacred places where we remember what our ancestors went through, their tragedies, their hopes, their victories.
Absolutely. How long have you been working on the book? Because I know, like any book, sometimes it could be something by the time it's released. This project could have been something that you were working on a decade ago. It could have been something that you wanted to start years ago.
Oh, absolutely. It was something I wanted to start well over a decade ago. I have worked on public art sites such as the African Burial Ground in Lower Manhattan. I worked as a consultant and a special advisor for about 15 years on that, behind the scenes. I worked on the Frederick Douglass Circle at 110th Street and Frederick Douglass Boulevard in Manhattan. Many years ago, I used to be the executive director of the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial Educational and Cultural Center at the historic Audubon Ballroom, where Malcolm X was assassinated. In fact, tomorrow, May 19th, we celebrate his what would have been his 90th birthday. So I've always been around historic sites. I've always been around dead people that way, right. Ancestors that way. And so the idea of collecting works that spoke to that experience finally allowed me to sort of crystallize itself maybe, I'd say, 7 years ago.
Okay.
So,
well, let's hold that thought. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching Beyond Focus TV. Stay with us.
my name is Stephanie Miles, and I am Miss Caribbean United States 2013, and you're watching Beyond Focus TV.
Welcome back. You're watching Beyond Focus TV. I'm Lydia Patel, sitting here with Manbo Dowoti Desir. Mambo, you're here talking a lot of great information. And before we took a break, you were saying how you essentially spent a lot of years working around dead people, but in a very different way, in a historical way. Do you think all of that helped shape your book?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about honor and respect. And so I wanted to be able to honor and respect the millions of Africans whose lives took an incredibly hard toll, as captives leaving the African continent, going to Europe, going to the Americas, North, South America, the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
It's believed that there are at least 30 million Africans whose lives were lost or otherwise
just displaced.
Displaced by the slave trade. And so I wanted to help tell their story in some way. And so I started following their footsteps. So, sometimes I joke and say I'm following the footsteps of ghosts. I'm following the footsteps of my ancestors. And in a way, that's what Voodoo also teaches us, to follow in their footsteps.
Oh, interesting. Very, very interesting. So that's a good principle.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of, they'd always kind of remember who you are, know who you are, or know where you come from.
Exactly.
In terms of writing the book, when you first decided, okay, I'm going to pen this book, I'm really going to make this a reality, what research did you have to do to, now that you have the understanding, you're around the historical stuff, anything in particular that you had to really sit down and focus on that you wanted to fine-tune?
Yes. First of all, there's a great deal of history around all of this.
Yes.
So that one has to become pretty familiar with the bigger historical context in which all of these monuments and, lieux de mémoire, these places of memory are. But then you also have to get to know the geography and the history of particular places. And then there are particular individuals whose lives may not have a great deal of information about. For instance, Binko Bohios he was from what is now Equatorial Guinea, captured by the Portuguese, sold to the Spaniards, ended up in Colombia, South America. And he was one of the founders of the first Palenque, which is like a free town in the Americas. And this man, this Palenque actually still exists hundreds of centuries later. But he was captured and quartered. In other words, he was cut in 4 pieces by the Spaniards. Okay? And so we don't know a great deal about his history. And so digging in and finding out, all right, who is this person? Why does this monument exist? What was their story? That's the sort of work that I had to do. Sometimes you know the story of something about, say, Le Citadel. I have to mention it. Today's Flag Day, Haitian Flag Day, and I've been there a number of times. That's one of my favorite places in the world. I feel so powerful, and I believe every Haitian, in fact, every African descendant needs to make a pilgrimage to Cité de la Ferrière. It's such a rich part, an important part of our history and a history of liberation. So yes, I've been there, but then I have to find out, okay, what is so unique about this place? And delving into military history,
That's true.
And architectural history too, was some of the work that I had to do. So it took a long time to do this. Yeah.
Now, looking at the book, it's not all that long. It's only barely 100 pages. It's like 85 pages.
Right.
Clear, concise, easy, a lot of pictures, like a beautiful book. So you would think all this information at first, when I was preparing for the interview, I thought, okay, this is going to be like a 500-page book. And then I see the book, and I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yes.
Was it hard for you to kind of trim it and make it in a way that's going to be so understandable for the readers and viewers?
Oh my God, yes it was.